Good morning, everyone, and welcome to Revolution Gathering. So glad you're here. Thanks for joining us here on YouTube or on any of our podcast stations that you're listening to. Don't forget to like and subscribe and leave us a review if you can. If you'd like to find more about Revolution, you can go to check out revolutionchurch.com. So hello, everybody. World's still in a crazy place as usual. We're not going to talk too much about that. We're going to talk more about a little bit about Paul Tillich and his concepts of sin and what I think about that and how the church has worked through that over the years. So that's what we'll be going to today. But as we continue to see the war happening with Israel and all the folks involved, it's just sad. I last night, I'm not the biggest prayer in the world, prayer and a prayer person in the world, but I was praying for everyone involved and that we find a solution and that peace prevails. Because sometimes prayer is the only thing that we can do, feel powerless at times. Anyway, grateful you're all here today. And we're going to get into this. So Paul Tillich, as you know, we've talked about a lot. He's one of my favorite theologians and philosophers. Here's a picture of him. Somehow I got this like Life magazine card. So I'm able to carry that around. Yeah, I'm Paul Tillich. He was kicked out of Germany by Hitler. Always cool. Talk about street cred. But here's a book by him. Today I'm going to be reading from some of his sermons. He wasn't only just a great philosopher and a great theologian. I mean, his systematic theologies, volume 1, 2, and 3 are just mind-boggling. He wrote quite a bit of philosophy and theology. But he also had time to do 3 books of sermons. And so here's one of them. It's pretty cool. This one, I think, I have here is from, look at this, owned by somebody else, from 1963. So these books are a bit old, but I think we'll all be surprised. I think this was written around 55. But let's see, let's double check. It says copyright 1948. But a lot of these are very as true then and true today. And so that's what we're going to talk a little bit about is the church and how we've dealt with kind of like the idea of sin and just as our traditions in the church, and have they been something that is right? Like, should we be questioning maybe our habits in the church and how we've set up community and how we've treated one another, especially when it comes to the concepts of sin? So that's what we'll be talking about today. So let's see. I'm going to be starting Romans 7. So it'll be Paul Tillich on Paul on Paul. Here we are. Romans 7. $19. And this is a lot of psychologists at the time who've read this said that this was often Paul's understanding of the unconscious, which I think is really interesting as well. But Paul here says, "For I do not do the good I want, but the evil I do not want, is what I do. Now if I do what I do not want, is it no longer I that do it, but sin that dwells within me?" And let's look at what Paul Tillich has to say about that. So basically the idea is that, often we do things that we don't necessarily want to do, or often we don't do things we think we should do. But let's see what we could do. All right, gaming and listening, have fun. I like multitasking. Sometimes when I read books, I'll just turn on the TV. I'll put on like some random show. Lately I've been putting on The Fugitive, the old 1950s TV show, The Fugitive. And I'll put that on and I read a little bit because kind of simple to follow those and read because my brain is always thinking, oh gosh, last night I could not sleep because my brain was overworking last night as well. So sometimes it's good to have a little distraction to focus, strangely enough. Double check, make sure this is the right one. Yes. So Tillich talks about this like kind of unconscious concept that's within us, and one of the things I think he really focuses on is prohibition, and how prohibition kind of, those ideas of saying like, well, we're not going to do this or we can't do this, kind of, he said the law arouses sin within us, and of course we're no longer under the law, but as Christians, we, over the years, and in the churches, most of us that grew up in, created a new law and a new prohibition of do's and don'ts. And often those things cause us to give it more power, give these what we would call sins, but Tillich doesn't like the concept of the word plural sins. He likes the word sin. So let's see what Paul Tillich says about it. He says, biblical images. Okay. But how many Christians or non-Christians have seen it? Most of us remember that at home or in school, in church, we were taught that there were many things that one would like to do that one should not do. I mean, come on. I spent half my time in youth group smoking behind the the cubicle. And that cigarette was so much better because I knew it was bad. And if one did them, one committed a sin. We also remember that we were told of things we should do, although we disliked doing them. And if we did not do them, we committed a sin. We had lists of prohibitions, a catalog of commands. If we did not follow them, we committed sins. I don't know how many of you grew up in that, but my earlier life, I mean, really probably until I was 18, probably 19, maybe 20 even, I felt like there was just these unwritten sins, these unwritten commandments, these unwritten rules that we all were forced to follow, which constantly made me feel like I was unworthy, that there was something wrong with me, that I wasn't good enough. I mean, literally for a time, I really thought God hated me. And that's a horrible place to be. So let's see what we can do with that. And often, too, I think we're all going to look at how we can respond to something like this in a more positive way, and maybe what does a negative response also look like to this concept. So, and if we did not do them, we committed a sin. We had a list of prohibitions and a catalog of commands. If we did not follow them, we committed sins. Naturally, we did commit one or more of those sins every day, although we tried to diminish their number seriously and with goodwill. This was perhaps still, in our image of sin, a poor, petty, distorted image, and the reason for this disrepute into which the world has fallen. So it's this concept of never really believing that we are accepted, that we're never really good enough. And again, we come in with that concept of grace with an asterisk. It's like, you have grace. And for me, I was always felt like they were telling me that grace was just to get you through the door. And then after that, it was sin management. And of course you were forgiven, but you needed to repent, and you needed to get down at night and pray, or in that moment and pray and ask for forgiveness, and then move on. So it was this constant thing. I mean, at one point I was so nervous growing up at the Assemblies of God. I thought, oh, have I lost my salvation because I said this, or I did this, or I thought that? Tillich goes on to say, the first step to understanding of the Christian message that is called good news. Now, there's a reason it's called good news, and this is what kind of blew me away, and why I do the work I do is realizing that it really was good news. Good news is to dispel the image of sin that implies a catalog of sins. So when Christ brings the good news, he's saying it's not about a catalog. It's not a list of do's and don'ts. It's not these made-up commandments anymore. Those who are bound to this image are also those who find the most difficult to receive the message of acceptance, of the unacceptable, the good news of Christianity. And he's saying the good news of the Christianity is the acceptance of the unacceptable. Their half sinfulness and half righteousness makes them insensitive to the message that states the presence of total sinfulness and total righteousness in the same man and in the same moment. I actually have a tattoo on my arm, and I was going to get forgiven, and my tattoo artist at the time was like, that's really played out, man. You should be more creative about it. And I was thinking about this scripture in Colossians, been holy and blameless as you stand before God without a single fault. And then, I think, and I was also thinking all sin, all fall short. And so I got blameless sinner. It's like this contradiction of words. It's that Christ almost brings us this complete contradiction, that's what grace does, is allows us to have something that's above all those ideas and those thoughts and that binary thinking of goodies and baddies. The half sinfulness, the half righteousness makes them insensitive to a message that states that the presence of total sinfulness and total righteousness in the same man at the same moment. They never find the courage to make total judgment against themselves, and therefore they can find the courage to believe in total acceptance of themselves. Those who are, so listen to that, therefore they can never find courage to believe in total acceptance of themselves. And the thing about grace is that we're always trying to accept that we are accepted. When we went through Tillich's sermon, You Are Accepted, early in the year, the reason I always go through that is because it's a vital part of grace is realizing that you are accepted, period. Not for believing more, not for thinking more, you are just accepted by that which is greater than yourself. And in that, an evolution happens. Something changes. We're free. An example for me was I decided for years to get sober. But I realized that my sobriety was based on my faith, because that was one of those lists of sins, one of those lists of things. You shouldn't get drunk, you shouldn't drink, especially underage. And one day when grace broke through in my life, and I realized I was accepted if I was a drunk or if I was preaching. It didn't matter. I was accepted just as I am, just where I was at, no ifs, ands, and buts, exactly the same way. And it was as soon as that prohibition between me and my life, my Christian life or God, the ground of being, was no longer there. The longest no longer didn't feel that need to perform, I was able to join a 12-step program, and I haven't had a drink since. And it was that freedom. The freedom of going, I just don't want to be miserable. I just want to be a better person. I just want to be a better friend. I want to keep people safe. It was this freedom that allowed me to be free. It was as though the law and these prohibitions had made it almost impossible, and continued to make me think that, well, I can't do it for God. It's too big. But I knew I could do it for myself. Interesting, right? How grace works. Let's see, I wanted to read one more thing to you guys. A couple more things to you guys. I know this is a lot of reading, but this is just how I do my work. I've been reading so much. The kids are at the house for like 11 days because their mom's out of town. And they're like, why are there books all over the floor, Dad? I'm looking at all these piles of books. So my son was using his tiny fingerboard to hop all over my books, but I've been just reading like a maniac lately. Do we still rely on our comparatively well-ordered life, avoiding situations of moral danger, determined by the rules of family and school and society? Listen to this. This is really good news. Do we still rely on our comparatively well-ordered life, avoiding situations of moral danger, determined by the rules of family, school, and society? For those who are satisfied with such a life, the words of Paul are written in vain. So when we get caught up in these ideas of lists and do's and don'ts, and the idea is that there's so many sins that we can't by any chance ever manage them, we become hopeless, and we live in this kind of trying to sin management, or we become grace monitors, like hall monitors, where, hey, I don't know about that, we lose it. And so often that's the problem I find within large communities of Christians. Not all, I haven't been to every church, but a lot of the churches that I grew up in, even originally in Revolution, there was this concept of like this kind of sin management, be careful, little feet, what you do. The big guy in the sky is watching you, and it felt like, he checked that one off. He did that. Oh, he did the good thing. No, check that one. And it felt like I was just constantly trying to make deals. And thank God for grace, because it frees us from that type of like insanity. But you understand also why a lot of people deconstruct, why a lot of people leave the church, because they're caught up in this race that just makes being accepted impossible. That's why I often really try to encourage my friends, and why I talk a lot about Paul, and I try to say, this is genuine Paul, this is, is because I feel like often some of my folks who are deconstructing avoid Paul a little bit. I'm going, don't avoid Paul, deconstruct Paul, look at Paul, look at what actually is Paul and not Paul, because this concept of grace is really beautiful. This concept of forgiveness, this is love and forgiveness and grace, they're all tied together. One more thing that Tillich says here is sin is our act of turning away from participation. So he gives this as concept of his sin. The divine ground from which we come and to which we go. Sin is the turning towards ourselves and making ourselves the center of our world and of ourselves. Sin is the drive in everyone, even those who exercise the most self-restraint, to draw as much as possible of the world into oneself. But we can be fully aware of this only if we have found a certain level of life above ourselves. And I like this life above ourselves because it gives me that concept of the contradictions, the two things coming together, like blameless sinner. I'm blameless, and it's saying we're able to get above ourselves. We're able to worry about others. We're able to love our neighbors as ourselves. We're able to care for others. Whoever has found themselves after they lost themselves know how deep the loss of self was. If we look at our estrangement from that point of reunion, we no longer in danger of brooding over our estrangement. We can speak of sin because its power over us is broken. Did you hear that? We can speak of sin because its power over us is broken. I'm going to jump down one more thing and read this. Sin uses the commandments in order to become alive. Prohibition awakes a sleeping desire. And so, I think that's that concept of all is permissible, not all is beneficial. It's saying like, let's get rid of these lists. Let's really realize what sin is. Sin is not a plural word. Anyway, so that's part of it and how we look at sin. Paul Tillich really, in a lot of his writings, says sin is separation. Separation from ourselves, separation from God, separation from the ground of being, and separation from the other. We often see it as a missing the mark, but we just have too many marks to keep our life in order. So accepting you're accepted and seeing sin as this kind of separation and constantly looking for reunion in our lives can help us a lot. It's not as comforting to leaders or people who maybe want to manage you, or people who think that your example or your life is somehow a reflection of their life. Often when we want to control people, we get into this sin management idea. Like, I heard you guys were drinking at the bar this weekend. You don't represent the church. I remember I was kicked out of a Christian school once for smoking at McDonald's, and they said, "You're just not, when you're out there, you represent the school." I was like, I didn't sign up for that. The Lord's army. So I often think that's part of us missing the point, is that we often create an atmosphere where we're actually more encouraging people by putting more prohibitions on people, by putting laws on people. To the extent that we see that some people try to legislate their convictions. Some churches and some Christians believe they should make their convictions into law, that people must be forced or go to jail. It's really wild, and I think that's one area where we really miss the point of what this faith is and what grace is and how powerful it is. I was talking to someone yesterday who was telling me that a family member of their churches is going through a really whole lot of stuff, and we were talking about different things. And I told them about this moment where I said, I've really felt abandoned by God, but I've been reading this book by Peter Rollins. And he was talking about how when we feel like God isn't there, God doesn't exist, it's almost as though we share that moment on the cross with Christ. So even when we feel that type of separation, that kind of division, in a way we're reunited with Christ, reunited with that essence of knowing what it feels like to be alone and be like, why have I been forsaken? And to me, that's just this constant continuous of why this is good news, is that we're always kind of connected to something in this world. I know that's vague, but I want to keep it vague because I think we all have to work this on ourselves. We can never reach the innermost center of another being. I can never know what you feel or what you think or what you're actually going through. I can empathize, I can sympathize. We can do that for one another, but we can never reach that innermost center of the other. And I think if we learn to love each other more and trust grace more in people's lives, and and not become a management and not become judgment, and allow people to find freedom and to follow their own conscience and to trust the Holy Spirit and that type of thing to grow into who they really are, is a way more beautiful way of doing things than trying to control people or guilt people or fire people. When Revolution had staff, when people would come to me with problems, they would think they were going to get fired. Oh, I'm just struggling with this or I'm struggling with that. And for me, I was like, no, why would we push you out? Why would we punish you for that? You're accepted here. We love you. Like, if this is a problem, like, can we work on it together? Can we move forward? But you need to know that you're accepted. And the reason I was able to do that is because of people like D.E. Polk and folks like that who did that in my own life and allowed me to live free and follow my world, my life, my acceptance, to accept that grace and to see what grace would do in me, not what they would do in me, but what grace would do in me. And I guess that's where spirituality really comes into it. People often say, oh, I'm spiritual, not religious. And sometimes I'm like, I'm religious, not spiritual, because I don't get into a lot of the spiritual stuff. But in the realm of grace, I believe in the spiritual. And in the realm of grace, I believe grace works within our conscious and our unconscious. I think it covers all of that. Is that good for you? We're going to look over at Matthew, which I think is this one's really important and kind of sees with how we can deal with these situations and what Christ says about these situations. And then we can also look about how we've dealt with these situations in the past is like, seriously, like listening to what people say at church or at school or at parent. And, it's like we're taking a poll about like, what is this, and it ends up like causing us to be miserable and to feel trapped and to feel like I'm never any good. I'm never good enough. And I know that's why a lot of people just leave the church. They don't leave the church. Oh, I didn't like the music or it's usually like, I just feel guilty all the time. And how is that good news to feel guilty, incredibly guilty all the time? I used to think that was when I was a teenager, like, oh, that must be a good sermon because I barely understood it and I feel bad for some reason. And it's a shame that we would take guilt and shame and mix that in with good news and with Christianity. And then that becomes like, oh, well, you know more about what we're against and you feel bad all the time. So you're doing a great job. To me, that's not good news. To me, that's not freedom. That's not forgiveness. That's, we've somehow messed it up. And so I think we've got to think about how we can have a reformation of grace in this world, a reformation in the church of acceptance. And I think that's why it's also good to get away from identity politics in some ways, is because we're able to say, like, no, that a Jew, no, that a Gentile, no free, nor slave, male, nor female, is because we can all trust the ground at being in the human experience, Matthew 11, I'm just going to read 28. It says, "Come to me, all of you who are weary and are carrying heavy burdens, and I will give you rest. Take my yoke upon you and learn from me, for I am gentle and humble in heart, and for I will find rest in your souls. For my yoke is easy and my burden is light." So this yoke is kind of carry, pulling the plows or the things, the burden, And Jesus is saying, my yoke's easy, my burden's light. And often, as a kid in evangelical, it was like, God's going to use you to change the world. Do you know what kind of pressure it is to be like a 13-year-old who's smoking cigarettes, 14-year-old smoking cigarettes, taking acid, doing all these things, and then being like, you'll have to change the world, so you better get your life right. You're like, oh, just constant self-hate. So if you're already disposed to insecurity or depression or things like this, unfortunately, a lot of times church rules and laws and tradition will end up defeating you even more and pushing you down even more. And so that's when I see a lot of people who are very angry Christians or very even legalistic because they're trying to control everything. I try to remember in those conversations to be sensitive and to have my heart open and go like, hey, they were just told this and they believed it and this is what they think it is and I know it's not. But I have to be gentle about it because both of those folks, the legalistic and the ex-church person, will often feel like, oh, you're just trying to tickle my ears, because that's what they've been told. Like, grace is too good. I remember one time asking my dad in in my 20s, I said, why didn't you preach more about grace? And he goes, because it felt like it was too good to be true. So, I mean, this is a true thing that we see often in the church, is that we don't really want to accept the idea of grace as being anarchy and grace being for everyone and allowing people to feel fully accepted. It's like we've got to keep people on their toes. And that might be a great way to build a big church. It might be a great way to build big communities and fill up rooms full of people. But that's a horrible way to live, and it's a horrible way for those people to live. People shouldn't be showing up on Sundays because they feel guilty, because they feel scared and like, I gotta get things right. What am I gonna do? Because Jesus here is saying, come to me, take my yoke upon you. Those who are carrying heavy burdens, I will give you rest. Like, lay down your burdens, lay down those. Mine is easy. Yes, it's still there. Yes, there's still a burden there, but it's an easy burden. Take that with you. And that's Jesus. That's not anybody else saying that. And so that's something important for us to think about in our daily lives and in our work. And if you're going to a church and you feel constantly burdened and you feel constantly judged, no matter if it's progressive or conservative, because both have their own ideals and lists and commandments that you're supposed to follow. They just might be a little bit opposite of each other, but it's still all about sin management or works management or, being the good person. I have to do this, I have to say this to be accepted. And Jesus said, don't take all that need for acceptance, all that loneliness, all that insecurity and lay it down at my feet. Because that's not what it's about. You are accepted. That's the truth right off the bat. You are accepted. Matthew, so what does Tillich say about Matthew 11:25? I think this is pretty good as well. I'm just checking my notes. Oh, I suppose again, we're missing the point. So the constant burden of sin management upon us. Here Tillich says, the religious law demands that he accepts ideas and dogmas that believe in doctrine and tradition, the acceptance of which the condition of his salvation from anxiety, despair, and death. Listen to that. We believe in doctrines and traditions, the acceptance of which is condition of salvation, of our salvation, from anxiety, despair, and death. Those aren't, the last time I checked, those weren't fruits of the Spirit. So I think we often find ourselves in this anxiety. I mean, life is hard enough. I mean, the fact that we have to pay our bills, continue to have good work that provides us enough finances to pay our bills. The fact that most of us are barely, one paycheck away or one hospital visit away from not, being in debt. We have enough anxiety and worries about in this world alone, much less to say that, oh, well, I go to church because I find a little bit of hope there. And it might be you find hope in the community, but not in the words. And so another thing I would say is if anxiety and despair and death are those things that continue to come up within your life and your walk with following Christ or following the ground of being, it's time to say, maybe I'm missing out on grace here a little bit. He always used male pronouns because this is like 1948, so forgive me. So he tries to accept them, although they may have become strange or doubtful to him. He labors and toils under the religious demand to believe things he cannot believe. I mean, I don't know how many people I've seen leave the church. I was at work the other day with somebody, and they said, yeah, I read the Bible. My parents made a deal with me. If I went to this thing and read the Bible, I could do what I wanted. And I read the Bible, and that's when I decided I didn't want anything to do with Christianity. And that concept there was, he labors, that person was laboring and toiling under the religious demand to believe things they cannot believe. But again, as Tillich said, you are accepted, not because you believe more or believe less, not that even if you believe more later, you just are accepted as you are. And so we often have this, and then we tell people, well, that's taking up your cross. Now, see, I would argue, like, taking up your cross is loving others. Taking up your cross is maybe taking a stand that isn't popular because you want to see other people have the same equality that you do. loving your enemies and loving other people's enemies. Often that is where you're taking up your cross, is where you become unpopular. And I mean, when Jesus is on the cross, he says, Father, forgive them, for they know not what they do. It's like this complete inclusive language. And often it's that inclusivity, it's that building bridges that is taking up your cross. It's not trying to follow all these commands and these rules, but we've made it into that. I mean, as far as like telling teenagers it's the music they listen to and the movies they see, the things like that, we've really, I'm not saying that those things can't be dangerous for some people, but for most people, that's just not the case. Finally, he tries to escape the law of religion. He tries to cast away the heavy yoke of the doctrinal law imposed on him by church authorities, orthodox teachers, pious parents, and fixed traditions. Man, fixed traditions. I wonder if somebody said traditions is just rumors spread by dead people. He becomes critical and skeptical. He casts away the yoke, but none can live in the emptiness of mere skepticism. And so he returns to the old yoke and a kind of self-torturing fanaticism, and tries to impose it on other people, on the children or pupils. So often that's the thing, is like these people leave the church, they're done with it, and then they come back and you see they're more legalistic, they're more judgmental than ever before. I have one friend that I've literally watched their whole lives just go back and forth to, out of church, back into church, and every time they come back into church, they become more judgmental, more, and this is somebody I've helped over my life, and it's really sad to me, because then they stop talking to their kids, they stop dealing with it, they stop, they just become more and more legalistic every time they come back, because they think, well, maybe the answer is more control, maybe it's following more rules, maybe I missed something, maybe it's separating from people I love, which in Tillich's concept would say that would be a sin. He is driven by an unconscious desire for revenge because of the burden he has taken upon himself. And so often we have that burden, these impossible burdens that we carry with us because of religion, because of tradition, because we're being judged maybe by people we really care and love about in our families or our community. And what we don't realize is that we take that anger and we are unconsciously striking revenge on another. We're projecting our bitterness. We're projecting our anger onto other people. We're yelling. And this is why often you see mega pastors who are like, I hate the gays. And then you find out later that they were in a gay relationship, or they had a relationship with a man, or they were having you find out these things because they're fighting that battle publicly. They're fighting that battle. I can't do this, so we're just going to push this on to other folks. And I mean, that's psychology, as we do those type of things. And we become hypocrites. Not because we want to be hypocrites, and not because anybody wants to be hypocrites, but because we don't know how to deal with that contradiction in our life. We don't know how to deal with that anger. We don't know what to do with it, because we think, well, this is what God wants from me, and for some reason I must be broken because it doesn't work for me. Why does it work for other people, but it doesn't work for me? But the problem is when we often suffer in this way silently, and we aren't open about it, everybody's doing that. Everybody's thinking, why isn't it working for me? You've got a whole community of people going like, why is this not working for me? And so they pretend. And so you've got a bunch of people pretending and putting impossible standards on one another. We're going to look at that in a second. So everybody's throwing each of these impossible standards because they think, well, that's what I'm supposed to do, even though I can't really do it. And we end up destroying one another. And we end up with probably the state of the church today. It might seem like a heavy judgment call, but it's not a judgment call of like, look at all these awful people. It's a judgment call of like, I hope we can help people be free from this type of thing. That's why Revolution as a community exists, and you as a community and where you're at exist, to maybe help people think differently. Many families are disrupted by painful tragedies, and many minds are broken by this attitude of parents, teachers, and priests, and others unable to stand the emptiness of skepticism. You hear that? Like, many communities are just destroyed by the leaders. The leaders not being able to understand the emptiness of the skepticism. Find new yokes outside the church, new doctrinal laws under which they begin to labor. Political ideology, which they propagate with religious fanaticism, scientific, the oars of which they defend their religious dogma, and utopia expectations they pronounce of the condition of salvation for the world. So see it's hard to see this shift as I've read it, because it's easier if you're reading the book yourself. But what he's saying is that a lot of these guys, a lot of these people, when they reject all this stuff, let's say they go, oh, I'm going to deconstruct, and then they decide like, well, I'm going to get rid of it. But often they'll find a new yoke, a new burden to carry with them. I have a friend who, and honestly, I don't have a problem with anybody with other religions. It's not really a major concern of mine, but I'm going to just use this as an example. I have a friend who became very disillusioned. He was a great leader. He really helped me a lot in my life, pastor, and he just became disillusioned with the whole thing and left. And he became a humanist. And the last time we met together, he started telling me, like, everything you believe is fake. Everything you believe is wrong. Why would you do that? Why would you want to go work for a church? Why would you want to work with this person? Because at the time I was thinking about working with my friend Lawrence Richardson. And he was like, why would you want to do that? It's empty. God's not there. There's nothing there. And he was really angry and really hurt and more dogmatic than he was when he was a leader in Christianity working for social justice. He just became more dogmatic. He traded one burden, one dogma for another dogma. And we often see that. We see that with sometimes when people go from Christianity to new atheism. We even see it when people say they're deconstructing, but it doesn't seem like they're really deconstructing anything. That just seems like they're really angry and make fun of other Christians and make fun of the people that hurt them. Like, I guess that's a step in a direction, but the problem is that you carried your dogma into the next level with you. In the next move, in the next step, you decided to not leave the dogma. So you took the dogma and you still are wrestling with this guilt and this anger, and you're still projecting it onto other people. So that's why we talk about disagreeing well, is because we continuously deflect. We continuously put our own worries, our own angers, our own projections onto others because we don't know how to deal with it. So often when I see somebody, especially here in Seattle, I meet a lot of people who used to go to Mars Hill, Mark Driscoll's church, who are now don't want anything to do with church. And I've had them like, and they always kind of have this kind of hurt towards me. I can tell because I'm a minister and they think that I'm still part of the problem, even though I don't agree with that guy about almost anything. So it's all of a sudden it's that they're projecting still their hurt and their pain is still there for someone who's not even like the person that hurt them or the person that made them angry, because they just can't even see it. They can't see the nuances there. They can't see the differences there. They can't see the mercy there. They can't see the love there, because they just identify this with that. And all they've done is taken that dogma and with them to just be against what hurt them. And that's the issue. That's why we need theology. I mean, that's why we need theology. That's why we do need theology and philosophers and theologians, but also why we need psychology, why we need to get help, why we need to see a good analyst, a good psychiatrist, a good therapist to help us deal with this hurt and this pain, so that we're not just trading one dogma for another dogma. Because that's what concerns me. Sometimes when I say, well, I feel like my progressive friends are acting like Christians did in the 80s and 90s. But really what I'm saying is they've took too much of that dogma with them and that anger with them, and were never able to heal from that. So now they've just taken it into this other stuff. It's like, it's hard because a lot of time it's like, I'm angry and here's some good news. God loves you just the way you are. And if you don't believe it, then you're wrong. Then you're bad. And then so we're still managing people's choices. We're still managing people's decisions and still judging people. And one of the hopes for me is when people realize that grace is pure acceptance, that grace is anarchy, is that we're able to eventually love our neighbor as ourselves and bestow that grace upon them as well. That's why you can maybe have a conversation with somebody where you're not as angry as the other person, because you've kind of, you're accepted, I'm accepted, let's just have a talk. There's really nothing to lose here and everything to gain. So we often do that. And it also can be in politics. I mean, we see it a lot in politics. We see it a lot in concerts. I mean, when I talk about politics on my own personal stuff, I try not to do it too much here at Revolution, but I do. But it's usually my personal beliefs. I don't want anybody to feel like they have to believe what I believe. I hope I can convince you that peace and nonviolence is the way to go. But I can't convince. I can't make you do that. I don't know. Like I said, I don't. I can never reach the innermost center of another being. But the hope here is that grace is is this great unifier and that would bring us together rather than to keep us separate. But no, what I was going to say is when I argue politics with someone, sometimes you can see that there's a lot of dogma built up within the political system. Like right now, I don't know if my dad's not talking to me because our politics are different or because my faith is different. Probably a little bit of both. But there's a lot of dogma there to kick people out of your life when they don't agree with your rules and your, your lists of what's right and wrong, your lists of commandments. When they don't, well, you don't follow the commandments of Jay, so I must banish you into the night. And from someone who's been banished a few times, I can tell you, I don't ever feel that it's ever changed my life. I've had situations where I've had a close friend of mine and me had a falling out, and we loved each other enough to kind of let the pain rest and take time away from each other and then talk again, and now we're buddies and best buddies again. Things like that happen. And reconciliation, that can happen in reconciliation, but if it's just this constant, like, no, they're wrong, they're bad, they're evil, they're out, they're gone, that can be I've done it to people before in my life as well. So I'm not the saint here telling you what to do. I'm not going to pretend like I'm those guys who are like, well, I've got it together and you don't. I don't have it all together. I do it sometimes as well. But it's progress, not perfection. And it's something that we learn over time. One of the things he says here is forcing a whole nation under the yoke of their creeds, which are religions, even while they pretend to destroy religion. We are all laboring under the yoke of religion. Did you hear that? He goes, this is written in 1948, so he didn't have the new atheists to deal with or anything like that at the point. This is a very old book. So it's just still spot on, though. This is just human nature, and that's the thing about human nature is we think it changes because we change styles or we change these concepts and ideas, but human nature seems to still stay pretty close to what it is. Then he goes, yes, their creeds, which are religious, even while they pretend to destroy religion. So the neo-atheist or the people like that. We are all laboring under the yoke of religion. He says it's all religion. We all sometimes try to throw away old or new doctrines of dogmas, but after a little while we return again, enslaving ourselves and others to their servitude. And so I think that's a good question to ask. Are we putting other people into our servitude? It's like when you find out something new. I remember, I came back from this conference and where I was just like, okay, I'm going to tell my board members that I'm LGBTQ affirming and went in there, and you expect everybody to be like, yay, you did it, and that wasn't the response I got. Because we often expect people to be with us where we're at in that moment. Like, oh, you didn't learn this too? You're not there with me. And so we end up pushing people into this, continuing into a different type of servitude. And so ask yourselves, am I doing that with other people? Am I doing that with new information that I have? Have I turned around and returned the favor to those people who are doing it to me in the past? Now am I acting like the one who's got it all together and got it right and causing these people to be under servitude and to do these things? Am I projecting my anger and my pain and this dogma onto other people? So those are really things that we need to learn to see in our lives, accept in our lives, and be aware of when we are communicating with others. So I'll end with this. In Luke 11. And see what Jesus says again. Luke 11:45. Jesus says, okay, one of the lawyers answered him, "Teacher, why do you say these things? You insult us too." So the lawyers were upset that Jesus was insulting them. See, human nature. And he said, woe, these are experts of the law. That's what he means. He doesn't mean like a lawyer from court. Experts of the law, religious teachers, if you will. He goes, woe also to you lawyers, for you load people with burdens hard to bear, and you yourself do not lift a finger to ease them. So I think that's often why people are so upset when they see their pastors or people in religious leadership and fail, because they go, you put these burdens on us and you didn't even carry these burdens yourself. Like, you cast these burdens upon other people and you didn't carry them. And this is what Jesus is saying. He's like, woe to you religiously. But do we often find ourselves doing the same thing? Because I run in all sorts of different circles But I often find that religion, even when it's at its most open and affirming, can often still have that burden of like, okay, well, you're only an ally if you do this. Okay, well, you're only this if you do this, and so you've got these burdens of, you've got to be good, you got to have it together, you got to do this. And you'll find that a lot of people, the burdens will change between what community you go to, but there's still this burden of lifting. And what I hope is when you come to Revolution, you don't feel burdens like this. I mean, I guess if anything is maybe you feel the burden to try to love yourself more and love your neighbor more. But I hope that's an easy yoke and an easy burden to carry for you. I know it's not easy to do, but I hope it helps you feel more accepted as you do it. That's the beauty of that kind of work, I think, is it often allows us to get away from ourselves, but then in a sense you go, oh, what I say, then you start saying things to yourself. You go like, I wouldn't say this to anybody else, like I wouldn't judge anybody the way I'm judging them. And then you realize like you're projecting something, like you're projecting onto your own self. Like you wouldn't be as mean or as hateful to other people. So hopefully that helps you give a little bit more grace to yourself as well as you give grace and love to others. I find that to be an interesting way grace works in my life. But you load people with burdens hard to bear. You yourself do not lift a finger to ease them. Woe to you, for you build tombs to the prophets whom your ancestors killed. So you're a witness and approve of their deeds and your ancestors, for they killed them and you build their tombs. And I've been listening to this podcast about the assassination of Dr. King, and I think in Washington we have this huge statue of Dr. King. You think about, when Dr. King died, he was at his most unpopular. Some people believe that the government and different people were involved with his death, and yet here's this, he was speaking against Vietnam and had lost all of his influence within the government, but here's this great big, tomb, if you will, this great big representation of Dr. King saying, well, you were right. Like, our laws don't allow people like this to exist, but after we kill them or after they die, after we reject them and then realize they did good, we build these great big images of them with these tombs to them. So it's this kind of thing that you think about. He goes on to say, I'm going to jump down to 52. Woe to you lawyers, for you have taken away the key of knowledge. You did not enter yourself, and you hindered those who were entering. And I think about the key of knowledge is sometimes when I'm speaking about scholarship, biblical scholarship, and people get so, why would you say that? When most of these pastors who have a degree or a doctorate or went to seminary, even went to Bible college, know that these books weren't written by Paul, understand that, but they've decided that it's just too hot to talk about in public, so it just becomes, well, it's just as important as everything else, and that's too bad, because it says, you hide the keys. You hide the knowledge. You're afraid, like, well, if they find this out. I mean, that's why the whole reason the pastoral epistles were written is to make Paul less graceful, to make Paul's work less inclusive, is to make him say, oh, no, he wants order and he wants this and he wants a hierarchy again. He said that stuff, but ignore that, because this is really where Paul is now, to undo that type of thing. So we change these dogmas for others. When we have these dogmas, and this dogma can be religious law, or it can be another religion, another faith. It can be politics. It can do all these things that we just put onto other people, and yet we don't carry it ourselves. And we have to be very careful of doing that, because it really can destroy people and cause people to lead them to disillusionment, and then coming back and being twice the sons of hell that those teachers were. I mean, Jesus talks about that. I was thinking about that we build the tombs, you killed these prophets and now you build their tombs and celebrate them. I was even thinking about my own mother. I remember a time when my mother was almost the butt of every joke. I mean, I remember going into a card shop in the 80s and seeing all these pictures of like, cry and you look like shit. And it was like a picture of someone pretending to be my mother, and Halloween masks and Saturday Night Live skits and all these things, and all these, all the Christians and celebrities are like, oh, look at her, and oh, she just cries all the time, and here I am 30 years past that, and I guess almost 20 years from, about 16, 17 years since she passed away, and now there's films being made about her. There's a play that's being done by Elton John and David Finch and all these wonderful people in on Broadway. It was already in England. I got to see it, and hopefully I'm going to be working with some of these folks on this, which is a really cool and exciting thing that may be coming up. but these ideas of like, we often, like Sinead O'Connor and people like that, where we just villainize them and then one day realize, oh, they were right, and then we celebrate them, but sometimes that celebration comes too late. And I think that's often something for us to think about with the burdens we carry and the anger we carry and our rules and group think. I mean, I like community, but I don't like when communities just think as one. I think people need to have their individual thoughts. And I think that's why having tough conversations is a really productive thing and leads to a better life for everyone. So I guess my question is have we lost the plot? Has the church lost the plot? And do we really need a reformation? A reformation where we take another look at the biblical canon, a reformation where we look at how we see sin, a reformation on how we treat one another, how we even do community together. It might be something worth us thinking about, looking about, and talking about more, and and giving each other the benefit of the doubt sometimes. Anyway, that's where I'm at, and that's where I'm at. That's where Revolution is at. That was the teaching for today. Thank Paul Tillich for joining us from Beyond the Grave. He takes a bow. And we'll be here next week. Listen, I want to thank everybody who gave this week, this past couple weeks, where we were like $400 late because we had to pay another bill, $400 behind on our reaching our financial, what we needed to do financially. And I put something out there, and you guys helped, and we were able to get to payroll and pay the bills. And I want to thank you for that. As always, Revolution depends on you. You are Revolution, and we can't make it. We're nonprofit, non-denominational, but you can get a tax write-off if you give to Revolution. You go to revolutionchurch.com. There's a couple different ways to give there financially, and we could really use your help because that's how we continue to do this work. That's why I'm able to have piles of books down here and read all the time and share this information with you. 30 years we've been doing this, so it's pretty exciting. Other ways you can help us by liking this and subscribing, sharing our stuff with other people, letting other people know that Revolution exists, sharing on social media. Hey, have you seen this latest talk? Have you seen what Revolution's doing? Those are other ways you can really share and help get the word out there and share that with people, share this talk with people. Anyway, I want to thank you all for your support and your love and your grace and for being a part of Revolution today. And we're here. If you want to know more about Revolution, you can go to revolutionchurch.com, or you can check out our Facebook page or our Instagram page or my Facebook page and my Instagram page. There's a lot going on there as well, and a lot of cool conversations happen there and in the DMs. So please join us for that so much. Yes, thank you, Charles, for that. It's really nice to hear. I got the nicest letter from somebody the other day. Nicest message from somebody the other day, just telling me that they found this community and that they finally found a place that they felt like they fit in, and that it really was that was like, for me, that's like $1 million. I mean, to me, that's like gets me up in the morning. To me, that reminds me that this work is doing what this work is supposed to be doing. That this community is providing what it's supposed to provide, and so I'm grateful that you're here. I'm grateful that people are finding a need here, and hopefully we're making things just a wee bit better. All right, thank you all. See you next week. Bye-bye.